The Eastburn family seemed like the epitome of the American dream, living a quiet life in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Gary Eastburn, an officer in the United States Air Force, was dedicated to his military career, providing for his wife, Kathryn, and their three daughters, Kara, Erin, and Jana. The family had recently moved to Fayetteville after Gary was assigned to Pope Air Force Base, a decision that promised stability and opportunity. Fayetteville was a typical suburban community, known for its peaceful neighborhoods and strong ties to the nearby military installations. The Eastburns settled into their new environment with optimism. They lived in a modest, two-story home on Summerhill Road, a place where children played freely and neighbors looked out for one another. It was a neighborhood where the unexpected rarely occurred, making what happened next all the more shocking. Kathryn, affectionately known as Katie, was a devoted mother, balancing her responsibilities at home while Gary's duties often took him away. She was the anchor of the family, managing the household with love and efficiency. Her days were filled with caring for their young daughters, ensuring their lives were full of warmth and security. Despite Gary's frequent absences due to military commitments, the Eastburns were a close-knit family. They maintained regular communication, writing letters and making phone calls whenever possible. Gary's role in the Air Force was demanding, but he and Katie shared a deep understanding of the sacrifices required by military life. Their shared commitment to family and country kept them united, even when apart. The Eastburn children, Kara, aged 5, Erin, aged 3, and Jana, just 22 months old, were the joys of their parents' lives. The girls were vibrant and full of life, loved by everyone in the neighborhood. Kara was the eldest, a curious and bright child who often took on the role of the responsible older sister. Erin, in her toddler years, was known for her playful spirit, while little Jana was just beginning to explore the world around her. The Eastburns were known in the community as friendly and approachable, often seen attending local events or simply enjoying family outings. They were active members of their local church, which provided a support system and a sense of belonging in their new town. The future seemed promising for the Eastburn family, with Gary's career advancing and their home filled with love and laughter. However, beneath the surface of this idyllic existence, an unforeseen darkness was about to descend upon the Eastburns. What began as a typical serene evening would soon unravel into a nightmare that no one in Fayetteville could have anticipated, forever shattering the tranquility of their neighborhood. It was a quiet May morning in Fayetteville when the routine tranquility of Summerhill Road was shattered. Kathryn Eastburn had not been seen for several days, and her neighbor, concerned by the lack of activity from the usually bustling Eastburn household, decided to check in. The Eastburns had been friendly and engaging, with Kathryn often seen playing with her children in the yard or chatting with neighbors. So, when the silence stretched into days, concern grew. The neighbor's initial knocks on the Eastburns' door went unanswered. Something felt off. The mail was piling up, and there were no signs of life inside. Taking a step further, the neighbor contacted the local police, explaining the situation. The authorities, well aware of the typically calm nature of the neighborhood, responded promptly, recognizing the potential for a serious issue. When the police arrived at the Eastburn residence, they were met with a locked door and an eerie silence. Forced entry was necessary, and what they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come. The house was in disarray, indicating a struggle had occurred. It was clear that a horrific crime had taken place. The discovery was chilling. Kathryn Eastburn and her two daughters, Kara and Erin, were found brutally murdered. Each had been viciously attacked, leaving a scene of unspeakable violence. Baby Jana, miraculously, was found alive, dehydrated but otherwise unharmed, in her crib. Her cries had gone unheard for days, making her survival a tragic miracle amidst the carnage. The sheer brutality of the crime stunned the officers. It was evident that this was not a random act of violence, but a targeted and savage attack. The home, once filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of family life, was now a grim scene of devastation. The immediate response from law enforcement was to secure the area and begin an intensive investigation. Detectives swarmed the scene, collecting evidence, photographing the crime scene, and attempting to piece together the final moments of Kathryn and her daughters. The community, upon learning of the tragedy, was plunged into a state of shock and fear. News of the murders spread rapidly through Fayetteville, a town unaccustomed to such heinous crimes. The Eastburn family, who had been the embodiment of a peaceful, loving household, had fallen victim to an atrocity that defied comprehension. The question on everyone's mind was, who could commit such an act and why? The pressure was mounting on the police to find answers and bring the perpetrator to justice before the fear gripping the community turned into outright panic. In the aftermath of the horrifying discovery at the Eastburn home, the Fayetteville Police Department launched a full-scale investigation. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the community, and there was an immediate push to bring the perpetrator to justice. Detectives worked tirelessly, combing through the house for any clues that might shed light on the identity of the murderer. The crime scene was chaotic, a reflection of the violence that had unfolded. Blood-spattered walls and overturned furniture told a story of struggle and desperation. Kathryn Eastburn and her two daughters had been savagely attacked, and the scene bore the hallmarks of a crime of passion, or perhaps one driven by deep-seated rage. Forensic teams meticulously gathered evidence, hoping to find fingerprints, hairs, fibers, anything that could lead them to the killer. Among the evidence collected, investigators noted that some personal items were missing, including an ATM card and a television set. This pointed to a possible robbery gone wrong, but the ferocity of the attack suggested something far more personal. The detectives considered every angle, unwilling to leave any stone unturned. In the days following the murders, the community's anxiety escalated. Residents locked their doors, fearful that a killer was on the loose. The police felt the pressure to solve the case quickly, not only to provide justice for the Eastburn family, but also to restore a sense of security to the town. Leads began to trickle in, and tips from the public were evaluated. One promising lead came from a neighbor who mentioned seeing a man in the area around the time of the murders, someone who didn't seem familiar to the neighborhood. This sighting provided a potential direction for the investigation, though it was still far from definitive. Investigators also focused on those who had recent contact with the Eastburn family. They learned that Kathryn had placed an ad to sell a dog, and a man had come by the house to see it just days before the murders. This man, Timothy Hennis, became a person of interest. Hennis was a former Army sergeant who had recently left the military. The fact that he had been at the Eastburn home just before the killings raised suspicions. Detectives tracked down Hennis and questioned him. His account of events was scrutinized, and inconsistencies began to surface. As they dug deeper into Hennis's background and actions around the time of the murders, the circumstantial evidence against him started to mount. Yet, despite these developments, the case remained far from solved. Investigators needed more concrete evidence to secure an arrest and bring closure to the devastated community. As the investigation progressed, Timothy Hennis emerged as the prime suspect in the Eastburn family murders. His visit to the Eastburn home shortly before the killings, coupled with his strained personal circumstances, painted a picture that detectives found hard to ignore. Hennis had recently left the military and was reportedly facing financial difficulties, making him a potential candidate for a crime motivated by desperation. Hennis, a tall and imposing figure, was married with a young child. He seemed to fit the profile of a man who could be pushed to the brink by stress and financial strain. The police scrutinized his timeline, piecing together his movements in the days leading up to and following the murders. Hennis had, in fact, responded to Kathryn Eastburn's classified ad about a dog she was giving away, and he had visited their home to adopt the animal. Witnesses reported seeing Hennis at an ATM near the Eastburn home shortly after the murders, using Kathryn's stolen bank card. This connection intensified the suspicion around him. The withdrawal, combined with his prior visit, placed him near the scene at a critical time. The police now had a direct link between Hennis and the crime, although it was still circumstantial. When detectives brought Hennis in for questioning, he denied any involvement in the murders. He admitted to being at the Eastburn residence, but claimed he had nothing to do with the violence that ensued. His calm demeanor during the interrogation contrasted sharply with the gruesome nature of the crime, leading some investigators to suspect he was hiding something beneath his composed exterior. To solidify their case, the police obtained a search warrant for Hennis's home. There, they found clothing that matched descriptions given by witnesses who had seen a man near the Eastburn home on the night of the murders. The clothes appeared to have been recently cleaned, but forensic analysis suggested traces of blood had been washed away. Despite Hennis maintaining his innocence, the mounting evidence was enough to secure his arrest. The discovery of the ATM card usage, the cleaned clothing, and his visit to the Eastburn home presented a compelling narrative for the prosecution. The authorities charged him with the murders of Kathryn Eastburn and her 2 daughters, confident they had their man. As the news of Hennis's arrest spread, the community was divided. Some were relieved, believing the killer was now off the streets, while others were skeptical, questioning the strength of the evidence against him. The upcoming trial promised to be a legal battle that would test the limits of forensic science and the determination of the justice system to hold someone accountable for such a heinous crime. Timothy Hennis's trial for the brutal murders of Kathryn Eastburn and her 2 daughters began amidst intense public scrutiny. The case had captured the attention of Fayetteville and beyond, with many eager to see justice served for the tragic deaths of the Eastburn family. The prosecution, armed with a variety of circumstantial evidence, was determined to make their case, while the defense was resolute in its argument that Hennis was innocent. The trial began with opening statements from both sides. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of the crime, describing the violence inflicted on the Eastburn family. They emphasized the brutal nature of the killings, particularly the savage attacks on Kathryn and her young daughters. The prosecution argued that Hennis's visit to the Eastburn home, combined with the stolen ATM card, was not just coincidence, but a deliberate connection to the murders. They also presented evidence of blood found on clothing in Hennis's possession, which they claimed had been washed to remove traces of the crime. The defense, however, quickly countered with their own theory. They suggested that Hennis had been at the Eastburn home simply to adopt the dog, as he had claimed. They argued that any evidence linking him to the murders was circumstantial at best. Hennis's defense team worked to discredit the prosecution's case by questioning the reliability of witnesses and suggesting that the forensic evidence was not conclusive. The defense painted Hennis as a victim of mistaken identity and improper investigation, stressing that he was an upstanding member of society and had no motive for such a horrific crime. As the trial progressed, the prosecution brought forth forensic experts who testified about the blood evidence found on Hennis's clothing. They also introduced a DNA analysis that seemed to match blood traces found in the Eastburn home, though it was far from conclusive. The defense, on the other hand, raised questions about the integrity of the forensic handling, suggesting that errors could have been made during the collection and analysis of evidence. Throughout the trial, Hennis maintained his innocence. He testified that he had not committed the murders and that any evidence implicating him had been fabricated or was the result of police overreach. He described his visit to the Eastburn home as entirely benign, claiming he had left after seeing that the dog was not what he had hoped for. The defense argued that there was no physical evidence definitively linking him to the crime scene and that the case against him was built on shaky grounds. The jury deliberated for several days, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Finally, after a lengthy process, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of the murders of Kathryn Eastburn and her daughters. The conviction was met with mixed reactions. Some felt a sense of relief, believing that the right person had been held accountable for the horrific crime. However, others were left with lingering doubts, unsure whether the evidence presented had truly been sufficient to secure a conviction. The trial had not only uncovered the tragedy of the Eastburn family, but had also exposed the uncertainties and complexities of the justice system, leaving the community divided and questioning the true nature of justice. After Timothy Hennis's conviction and sentencing, the case seemed to have reached a definitive conclusion. Hennis, who had been found guilty of the brutal murders of Kathy Eastburn and her 2 daughters, was sentenced to death. The community in Fayetteville, North Carolina, was left grappling with the horror of the crime and the unsettling reality of a man from their midst being condemned for such an atrocity. The Eastburn family was, understandably, relieved by the verdict, but their journey was far from over. They had not anticipated the lengthy legal struggles that would follow. Hennis' legal team, aware of the controversial aspects of the case, launched a series of appeals. They focused on challenges to the forensic evidence, suggesting that it was not sufficient to conclusively link Hennis to the murders. They argued that the DNA and physical evidence found at the scene was inconclusive and that the verdict was based more on circumstantial evidence than on solid proof. Despite the emotional weight of the case, the legal process began to expose flaws that would ultimately shake the foundation of the conviction. In 1999, after spending years on death row, Hennis's conviction was overturned by the North Carolina Supreme Court. The court ruled that his defense had not been properly considered during the original trial, and the case was sent back for retrial. The legal battle took a new turn, and for the Eastburn family, this was a devastating blow. The emotional toll of reliving the trauma of the murders was compounded by the uncertainty of whether justice would ever truly be served. Hennis was retried in 2006, and this time, the defense presented new evidence that questioned the prosecution's original claims. The jury was forced to reevaluate the evidence, and in a surprising turn of events, Hennis was acquitted. The acquittal left many stunned, especially the Eastburn family, who believed they had lost the battle for justice. The public reaction was mixed, with some believing that the case had been mishandled, while others felt that the flaws in the evidence were too significant to ignore. The emotional toll on the Eastburn family was immense. They had already lost their loved ones in such a horrific way, and now they had to endure the painful realization that the man who had been convicted of the crime was walking free. While Hennis's acquittal did not end the story of the Eastburn family, it forced the public to reconsider the effectiveness and fairness of the criminal justice system. This case became a symbol of the complexities and unpredictability that can arise in high-profile trials, leaving the Eastburn family to cope with their own sense of loss and a lingering question of whether true justice had ever been served. The legacy of the Eastburn family massacre has endured far beyond the immediate shock of the tragedy, influencing various aspects of criminal justice, victim support, and community awareness. While the brutal killings of Karen and her daughters, Erin and Brooke, left a deep scar on the North Carolina community, it also sparked significant changes in how such cases are handled and remembered. The lessons learned from this horrific event have helped to shape not only legal reforms, but also social attitudes surrounding domestic violence, crime prevention, and community resilience. In the wake of the massacre, public discussions began to center on the vulnerabilities of women and children in situations of domestic violence. The violent nature of the crime underscored the need for stronger protections for victims and more proactive intervention strategies. Local authorities recognized the importance of early detection and intervention, especially for individuals who might be living in abusive or dangerous situations. This led to increased efforts by law enforcement agencies to work in partnership with social services and community organizations to identify at-risk families and provide necessary resources before violence could escalate. The Eastburn case also highlighted flaws in the criminal justice system that allowed such a tragedy to occur. Public outcry surrounding the case pushed for greater scrutiny of the parole system and the early release of violent offenders. This led to legislative changes aimed at improving the process by which criminals are assessed for release and monitored after serving time. Efforts to ensure that convicted individuals, particularly those with violent histories, do not pose a continued threat to society became a central focus of reforms in the following years. These changes were intended not only to prevent similar incidents, but also to send a clear message that the justice system would no longer overlook the danger posed by individuals with a history of violent crime. On a broader scale, the massacre contributed to a shift in how the public views crime prevention and safety. While North Carolina's communities had always been concerned with crime, the horror of the Eastburn killings ignited a renewed commitment to both strengthening law enforcement capabilities and fostering community engagement in safety initiatives. Residents became more vigilant, sharing information with authorities, and taking a more active role in looking out for one another. Schools, churches, and other community organizations became more involved in creating support systems for those who might be in abusive situations, helping to raise awareness and offer assistance to potential victims. The memory of Karen, Erin, and Brooke Eastburn continues to live on through memorials, community efforts, and the ongoing work of advocacy groups. Their tragic deaths reminded everyone of the fragility of life and the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals. Over time, the case became more than just a symbol of loss. It became a rallying cry for change. Families, law enforcement officials, and policymakers alike sought to ensure that the mistakes made in the past would not be repeated, and that the suffering of the Eastburn family would help prevent future tragedies. Today, while the pain of that day still lingers for many, the lessons learned from the massacre continue to influence policies, social attitudes, and community values, ensuring that the legacy of the Eastburn family serves as a catalyst for positive change.